The views and opinions expressed tonight are only those of our speakers and participants only, and do not necessarily reflect those of AA on the Rocks, the philosophy of AA, or AA as a whole. Tonight we are gathered in a spiritual context and considered guests of this facility, so we discourage profane and vulgar language and ask our speaker and all participants to ensure their comments are related to alcoholism and respect an adequate demonstration of recovery. Our speaker in 12-step series presenter for July is Bill H., and he will kick us off tonight with steps 1 through 3. So, yeah.
My name is Bill, and I am an alcoholic. Nice to see old friends and new friends. Hello to those of you on Zoom. The Zoomiverse with us tonight. Well, we are going to talk about steps 1, 2, and 3 tonight in more ways than one, because that's the way I work them. More ways than one, Chuck. I have a sobriety date. No, really, I do. It's March 18th, 1981. So I haven't had a drink in a while. And for a long time, I thought that's why I was an Alcoholics Anonymous. What? How's that? My name is Bill, and I am. Oh, no. You know, you get into this routine. I thought I came here to stop drinking. Did you? I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous, you would think it's about alcohol. And you would think it's about learning how to not use alcohol, even though I really resented the idea of not being able to use alcohol. So I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And as we go through this series and these 12 steps, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I used to be like, what happened. And you'll get a feeling of what I'm like today. You may not like all that, but you know, what you see is what you get. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight on the so-called Drunkalog, because I really want to lay the groundwork for the 12-step recovery program with steps 1 and 2, because I missed that for a long time. My first home group, well, by the way, I have a sponsor today. I have a home group today. I belong to the 905 group. We meet at 9:05 Monday morning. Helps us remember what time to get there, right? Some members of the home group are here tonight. Grateful for that. My first home group was a meeting in Kansas City, 6:30 p.m. Monday night, called the Power and Light Group, because we met in the Power and Light building, the utility company. I always thought it was kind of nice that I went to meetings for 2 years at the Power and the Light. I missed it until I looked back later and saw that, but I think that's kind of neat today. And I would go to that meeting and I would listen to those men talk about their experience, strength, and hope. And I'd pick up a little bit here and a little bit there. I was given a big book. You know, the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, from which we get our name. I was given a big book at my first meeting. I was given a sponsor at my first meeting. Said, read the book, come back next week. Something like, tell me if you have any questions. I've always been a good reader. I test well, you know. I don't remember a lot, but I pass tests really well. And I didn't drink. And I didn't drink for 6 weeks. I read the book. Now, I say I read the book. I'm going to talk in a few minutes about reading the book and understanding the book. Two different things completely. And I went about 6 weeks, all the alcohol's out of my system, mostly. And I went to a business dinner. I had 2 glasses of wine, went home to my little dirty drunk flat, got on my knees beside my bed, because Alcoholics Anonymous said, get on your knees and pray. Say thank you at night and say please in the morning. And so I got home from that business dinner after having only 2 glasses of wine and quitting. And I got on my knees and I thank God and Alcoholics Anonymous for teaching me how to have 2 drinks and stop. That was a Thursday night. The following Monday, I went to a going away party for a friend of mine. I had 2 glasses of beer and stopped. And I went home and I got on my knees beside my bed in my dirty little trunk flap. And I thank God and Alcoholics Anonymous for teaching me how to have 2 drinks and quit. That was a Monday night. By Friday, I was drinking around the clock. And I've had bad months. I've been in prison. I've been in jail. I've been on the run from the FBI. I've been through 2 divorces. I've had my kids, my parents, nobody talking to me. I've been through 21 years of drinking and all the bad stuff that goes with it. But the month between the middle of February and the 18th of March, 1981, far and away is the worst month I've ever lived. And I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, metaphorically on my knees, maybe willing to listen. And one of the things I've learned in the last several years about steps 1 and 2 is, for years, I'm one of these people that said, I work step 1, I work step 2, I work step 3, and so forth. I've come to understand, now this is for me. You may or may not see it that way. You may or may not experience it that way. And I'm okay with that. Recently, I have become okay with other people working the program differently than I do. I'm almost over it. Because we have the same 12 steps, but we all have a unique, very personal spiritual awakening. The exact same 12 steps work a little differently, sometimes a lot differently in each one of us. And that's okay, because there's more to this deal than not drinking. Look at step 12. If you don't remember it, it's the bottom of this page right here. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's a lot more than not drinking. Having had a spiritual awakening. Having had, interesting use of the verb, having had, been going on, is going on, and the implication is it'll keep going on. Having had a spiritual awakening. Did you come here tonight on purpose to have some more of your spiritual awakening? Because if you didn't, and I don't always consciously think of that, this isn't a quiz, we're not going to have a show of hands. But in one way or another, every one of us is here tonight for ourselves and for one another to help each other continue to have our spiritual awakening, for the simple reason that not drinking is not enough. The first sentence in the big book that made sense to me, and it's on your outline, it's on page XXVIII in the 4th edition. All these page numbers are from the 4th edition. The first sentence in the big book that made sense to me, and it didn't happen that first week, it happened sometime in the summer of 1981. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Isn't that simple? It's part of step 1. I didn't know that. It doesn't say, blink, 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 pay attention, step 1. It doesn't say that. It's just in a paragraph in the doctor's opinion. But think about that. Men and women drink essentially. It explained everything to me. What I've got on the outliner, I don't know, 20 sentences or so. Some of my favorite sentences in the book about steps 1 and 2. You may have your favorite sentences. You don't have to go along with my favorite sentences. But that was the first sentence in the book that made sense to me. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect. Remember the first 2 or 3 drinks? Let's just pause a minute. We're not going to romance the drink. Don't misunderstand me. Don't shut down the Zoom, Harold. I'm not here to romance the drink, but do you remember how the first 2 or 3 drinks felt? Oh, you come on, admit it. Come on. Chuck's licking his lips. My sponsor, Gene in Florida, used to say, if everybody in the world felt the way I feel after 3 drinks, everybody in the world would be an alcoholic. Now, my wife takes a drink. God love her. Slowly. Never quickly, always slowly. My wife takes a drink. And they may put another little bit of wine in her glass, and so she technically has a second drink. It doesn't matter. I look at it, and I look at it. Now, I haven't had a drink in a long time, but I'm watching that second glass of wine, and it's not going anywhere. And I can't stand it. I finally say, aren't you going to drink that? And she says, no, I'm starting to feel it. Glenn, this is why I have a flat forehead. That's the point. Except for us, it kills us. Except for us, because what I didn't know was that I have a physical craving. As an alcoholic, I physically metabolize alcohol differently than a non-alcoholic. That's nobody's fault. It's not a curse from God. It's not a punishment on the family. It's just sun comes up in the east, alcoholics have a physical craving. Don't know, why does it matter? Why is so overrated? What and who and where and how is important. Why does it really matter? I'm not going to not be an alcoholic. So when I tell you my name is Bill and I am an alcoholic, I mean it in the present tense. Now I work step 1 and 2 3 different ways over the years. First way I call the summary method. This is the summary of the 12 steps right here. Those of you on Zoom can't see it, but there's one of these beautiful, I don't know, about 8 foot, 7 foot high shades up here with the 12 steps on it. Okay, we're going to take step 1 right now. You ready? We can all do this together. It's a we deal, right? We admitted we were powerless. First 5 words. Starting to get a little itchy if you're like me. I'm self-reliant. I've got power. I've got control. I'm a little nervous. We admitted we were powerless over what? When I got here, I was not powerless. I was a little misunderstood, but I wasn't powerless. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Only when I drank it. I grew up in an alcoholic family. Turns out I've been powerless over alcohol and other people since the day I was born. We were powerless. We admitted. That's the verb. We admitted. I've been powerless over alcohol since the first time I drank. I took my first drink in the fall of 1960 at that first fraternity party my freshman year, and I drank alcoholic. I drank the first beer. The first beer had the second beer. The second beer had the third beer. I didn't know I had a physical craving, but I couldn't stop once I started. And I drank that way for 21 years. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol dash. Continued thought. This is the way it's printed on page 50 out of the big book. We read it tonight, second page, chapter 5. It's the summary of the 12 steps, and step 12, of course, on the top, page 60. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. We're going to find out in the next 6 or 7 minutes why my life is unmanageable. Is because I deny, I'm in a delusion about my powerlessness. It began with alcohol, and it turned out I'm powerless over a lot of other things too. I'm powerless over whether you listen to me right now. That hardly bothers me anymore at all. Used to drive me crazy. I'm powerless over whether you agree with me right now. That really used to bother me. I'm powerless if one of you comes up to me after the meeting and said, "You are so full of it." And I will say, "Thank you for sharing." I'll question your parenthood later. I want you to, if you have a big book, look at page 30 real quick. It's the single most important page to me in the big book about step 1. Page 30 says in the middle of the page, the delusion has to be smashed. It talks about obsession on page 30. It talks about illusion on page 30. And it talks about delusion on page 30. Men and women drink because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Okay, I can understand that. XXX or XXVIII in the doctor's opinion. And then you got XXX. Cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. So the doctor tells us about the physical nature. Bill's story, page 5. I still thought I could control the situation. Remember those days? Right up to the very end. I still thought I could control my drinking on March 17th, 81, after 3 months in AA. I took my last drink on the 18th because God made it very clear to me, you can't, not only can you not control your drinking, you're not going to die. Because I was ready to die. If I could drink myself to death the next 6 weeks, I'd have kept going. And God gave me an out-of-body experience that said, you're not going to die. And that was the day, March 18th, 1981, is not only the day I took my last drink, it's the day I realized I cannot control the situation. So the illusion that I was in control, in other words, I believed something that wasn't true that was. You see, I never could control it, but I thought I could. That illusion was busted that day. Bill talks on page 6 about the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. Do you remember the next morning? Any of them? Pick one. If you think about taking a drink, and we do from time to time, not acting on its recovery, we're going to think about it from time to time. It's human nature. Remember the next morning. That'll help you not take the first drink. Page 21, the definition of a real alcoholic: lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. If I don't start, now watch this, this is tricky. If I don't take the first drink, no matter how restless, irritable, discontent, full of resentment, and lack of forgiveness I am, no matter how full of fear I am, whatever, if I don't take the first drink, I will not trigger the physical craving. That's what it means to be powerless over alcohol. But there's a lot more to recovery, because that's just the first half of step 1. And so we get to page 30. The great obsession is defined as the idea that someday, somehow, I'll be able to enjoy and control my drinking. What's an obsession? It's a thought that becomes so powerful that it crowds out everything else in my life. This time it's going to be different. This time I can handle it. That's living in step 1. That's living in the lack of sanity of step 1. And that's what page 30 is talking about. Page 30 is the first page of chapter 3. Chapter 3 is full of stories about the delusion of control. Why is control an obsession? And why is the delusion so dangerous? The delusion is believing something isn't true about me that is. My delusion was I am not powerless over alcohol, and my life is not unmanageable. I want to underline that tonight because I can still have that delusion today. Oh, I'm powerless over alcohol. I'm powerless mostly over the city police. But I can have the delusion that I'm not powerless over other things. And I can have the delusion that my life is not unmanageable because I still think I can control other things. For me, getting over the delusion is much more difficult because I can tell myself I don't have it. And that's one reason I say, I am Bill and I am an alcoholic. It's not I was now. And so we come to the first real big choice in the book, page 44. Interesting way to begin a chapter called We Agnostics. Doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis. Boy, that's a close call. If you haven't read page 44 in a while, just soak it up. I mean, it's magnificent. Weaves, kind of like fly fishing. Teases you. He teases you. And then, let's see. Boy, I need to think about that. Doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, because the spiritual basis doesn't look that popular. And then we get to page 62. These are some of my step 1 highlights. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our trouble. What? I thought it was drinking. Notice the sentence, selfishness, self-centeredness, we think is the root of our troubles, is in the present tense. Most of the big book is written in the past tense. When I say to you selfishness, self-centeredness, we think is the root of my trouble. Is right now, isn't it? Is right now. Page 62 goes on to say the alcoholic is. It doesn't say was. Alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, and he or she usually doesn't think so. That's the delusion. But see, I didn't read those pages in the beginning. I just worked the summary version of 1 and 2. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, our lives become unmanageable, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I'm done with steps 1 and 2. I'm ready to take step 3. And then I got a little more advanced. Somebody showed me a big book. I moved to Arkansas 3 years sober, started hanging around with Joe and Charlie, studied with those guys for 2 years. You can't hang around those fellows and not get into the book. And they pointed out the ABCs to me on page 60. We heard them tonight. A. Now this is the ABC version of 1 and 2. A. We were alcoholic, could not manage our own lives. Sounds kind of like powerless and unmanageable. Doesn't that kind of sound like step 1? So they snuck it in here again, see. But they don't call it step 1 and 2. B, no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. It's like 1A or 1.5. 1 on the way to 2. And then C, God could and would if. Program of recovery is conditional. God could and would if he were sought by who? Moi. The word sought is introduced in the ABCs on page 60. We're going to see way out in step 11. The verb in 11 is keep, seek, continue to seek. I did not know for several years in Alcoholics Anonymous because there's no place in the first 62 pages where it says, now we were at step 1. The closest it comes is on page 30 when he says the delusion has to be smashed. This is the first step in recovery. But it's not in italics like the rest of the steps are beginning with 3. There's no place in the book that says this is step 2. The real way I have found to help me have a spiritual awakening and to enlarge my spiritual life to work step 1 and 2 is read the first 62 pages of the big book. Because until we get to the ABCs on page 60, and then even though Bill says, okay, we're ready for step 3, he spends 2.5 pages redoing step 1 and 2. That's how hard-headed he knows I am. I don't think he wrote that for you. I think he wrote it for me because I'm a little more hard-headed than you are. What's step 2? It's the solution to my problem that comes up in step 1. Step 2 is real simple. Came to believe. What's the hard part? Middle of the step. Power greater than Bill. Do you sit here tonight in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, admit there's a power greater than you? Down deep, are you willing? Really? Are you willing to admit that? I wasn't. And I didn't know I wasn't willing to admit it. It was part of a delusion. You know what my first home group was? Those 17 men in a Power and Light building on Monday night. I look back on that now. I mean, I'm almost ashamed to tell you that, but that's how big a deal I was in my own mind. I was a big deal. I mean, I knew I was a big deal, but I was a bigger deal than I thought I was. I was barely able to concede that my sponsor and his sponsor and the other 15 men in that meeting on Monday night probably knew a few more things than I did, at least about alcoholism and recovery. Look at page 45. Right after we make the choice on 44, spiritual life, doomed to an alcoholic death, page 45. The purpose of the book. The purpose of this book. Page 45. Find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. I read that for a long time, thought step 2 was about not drinking. find a power greater than myself that will solve my problem, because I thought my problem was not drinking, even though the book up to that point has talked over and over and over again about people not being able to not take the first drink because they couldn't change the way they thought. The real problem was in the way they thought. If they didn't take the first drink, I wouldn't trigger the physical craving. It finally sank in what it says in the doctor's opinion. More than human power is needed. Notice that's not in the past tense. Way back in the doctor's opinion, more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. What's a psychic change? Change in my mental and emotional response to the situations in my life. That's all it is. Personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism is what it's called in Appendix 2. Doctor ends his letter. Though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. And then Bill says on page 12, Ebby's come to talk to him. Ebby suggests, why don't you choose your own conception of God? So Bill thinks about it for 2 pages in the big book and says on page 12, a God personal to me? I didn't like that idea. Can't you relate to, I didn't like the idea? If you haven't read page 25 in a while, I recommend it. Up at the top of page 25 in italics, there is a solution. Read page 25 about spiritual choices. Get all the way down to the bottom of page 25. Here are these words. Accept spiritual help. Accept. Doesn't say like it. Doesn't say be able to figure it out. Doesn't say admit it to your mother-in-law. Doesn't say admit it to your spouse. That page 25 is the keeper, baby. Up at the top, there is a solution. By now, we should be interested in that. Accept spiritual help. This is about a lot more than not drinking. Alcoholics Anonymous is. Page 29. Clear-cut directions. The word in black on page 29. Clear-cut directions are given, how we recovered, and it goes on to say how each of us found our relationship with God. Now, yes, it's God as we understood him. The belief I have in my God doesn't have to belief you have in your God. John Cashin came up to me in the summer of 1981, meeting at P3 Club in Kansas City. I was about 6 months sober, pontificating, because I studied theology for a while at Washington U and knew quite a bit of it. We're about to go to step 3, just so you know. We are. We're going to go to step 3 in just a minute. And John came up to me and put his hand on my shoulder, and he was a steam fitter, and he had a very large hand. It kind of felt like the hand of God. It's been 42 years ago. It still feels like the hand of God. Listen, he said to me, there's only one thing you need to know about God. You begin with this, you're not him. And then he said, work on there is one. And so it comes down to there is one and you're not him. I woke up this morning. My first 3 prayers before I get out of bed, before I go to my quiet time, before I go to my chair. My first 3 prayers are this: God, help me not take a drink today. I never want to forget what John told me about me in step 2. There is a God and I'm not it. I am an alcoholic, and on my own, I will get well. Oh, I'll never forget that I'm an alcoholic, but I'll go back to where I think I can handle it. I don't need you people that much. I don't need these meetings that much. Oh, Zoom was fun for 3 years. Hello, everybody on Zoom. But you know, you people are getting a little, same old every week. I don't think that way, but I know I'm able to think that way. So I start my day, God help me not take a drink today. My second prayer is this: God help me be of service to those in my life today. And my third prayer is, if I can't be of service, help me not become part of your problem. That's basically my step 1 and 2 prayer in the morning, because on page 53 was my choice. And it's still my choice. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? And that's not on you, and that's not on my mother, and that's not on my father, and that's not on the preacher, and that's not on the policeman. That's not on my sponsor. God either is or isn't. What was my choice to be? And the choice is, there's a power greater than me that can help me. Because by now, because the third way, keep in mind, the first way to work 1 and 2 is the summary version. Working the steps off the summary doesn't do much for me. This is a summary of the steps. It does not tell me how to work the steps. And I come to find out the first 62 pages of the big book are steps 1 and 2. Over and over, threaded through those pages. They're all the information about what it means to be powerless, what it means to be unmanageable, what it means to need a power greater than me to restore me to sane thinking, beginning with the same choice to not take the first drink today. For an alcoholic like me, the sanity always begins with, make the same choice today, not to take the first drink. Any other sane choice I'm going to make has to follow that. And so you get to the third step. And the way I get there on the big book is kind of interesting in a way, the way he writes this. At the after those ABCs on page 60, he says, being convinced. Why, that's an uphill slog. Convince an alcoholic of anything they didn't think of themselves in the first place that they think they can get away with. Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood it. Key word. You're going to see it in the summary on page 59, care of God. Why wouldn't we want a little care? C-A-R-E. It's a nice word. Why wouldn't we want a little care of God? Even though he says that on page 60, he spends the rest of 60, all of 61, and all of 62 convincing me again of 1 and 2. He knows who he's writing to. People who are hard to convince and need a lot of repetition. And we finally get to the bottom of page 62. This is the how and the why of it. Are you ready? This is the first piece of step 3. First of all, we had to quit playing God. And here's one of the very few whys in the big book. The next sentence. It didn't work. What's it mean to play God? Think I know what's good for me. Think I know what's good for you. You know, I wasn't playing. I meant it. I did know what was good for me, and I still can. And sometimes I'm right, but I'd rather have God be the judge. And then he goes on to say God is going to be our director. He is the principal. And we get to the top of page 63. We have a new employer. If you have a big book with you, please open it to page 63. If you didn't bring a big book tonight, I hope you bring one next week, because we're going to be in 4 and 5 next week. This is why we take step 3. Here are the promises of step 3. I want you to listen to this. These promises are written in the past tense. It's like a sales job. It's like the incentive program. If I'm going to work for this new employer, what he calls it on the top of page 63, going into step 3. If I'm going to work for this new employer, I kind of want to know the benefit package, don't you? Okay, here's the benefit package of going to work for God of my understanding is described in Alcoholics Anonymous. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed. If, conditional, we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we become conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and he even throws in hereafter. We were reborn. Those are in the past tense because it happened to them already by doing what is described in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. if I want these promises to come true in my life, I have every reason to believe and hope for. The top of page 63 can come true in my life just like it came through in their life. Remember, the very first sentence in the book were about 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Turns out it wasn't completely hopeless. There is hope in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 63. So let's do step 3 together right now. We're going to close tonight with step 3. We're going to resume next time with 4 and 5 with step 3, because 3 is the bridge from the information in 1 and 2 of the first 62 pages of the big book. I don't work steps 1 and 2. They work me. When I become willing to absorb and accept and come to believe in the information. Because the way to work 1 and 2 is not the summary way for me. And it's not enough just to read the ABCs. I need to buy into the information in 62. So let's do our step 3 prayer and get started on this road to recovery. God, I offer myself to thee. Build with me, and you will do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Thank you very much. Next time, steps 4 and 5.